The audacity was unreal. My spoiled sister smirked across the table and said, "Mom and Dad said I'm moving into your room." Everyone laughed like it was a joke. My blood boiled. They thought I'd stay quiet, but that night I showed them exactly who they were messing with. I never imagined that a simple family dinner could set the stage for the most chaotic night of my life. The air in the dining room felt unusually heavy that evening, thick with the kind of tension you could almost taste. The table was set neatly, plates aligned like soldiers, forks gleaming under the warm glow of the chandelier. Outside, the sky had collapsed into twilight, casting an orange haze through the curtains, and the faint hum of traffic in the distance made the silence inside feel even more oppressive. I just poured myself a glass of water when I noticed her, my sister, standing by the doorway, a smirk plastered across her face as if she had been waiting for this exact moment for months. Don't just watch, share with your friends and subscribe to stay connected with our latest content. Mom and Dad said I'm moving into your room, she said, her voice light, teasing, but the words hit me like a brick. I froze mid breath, the glass in my hand trembling slightly. For a moment, I thought it was a joke. Maybe she was trying to get a rise out of me, a typical childish stunt. But no one laughed. Not at first. Her smirk didn't waver. Her eyes sparkled with that infuriating blend of arrogance and mischief. Then the laughter came. Light, casual, exactly the wrong kind of laughter. It was that hollow, "Isn't she funny?" laughter that made my stomach twist. Mom and Dad chuckled, their eyes briefly flicking to mine as if to say, "Isn't she clever?" My blood boiled in a slow, controlled surge, a storm building behind my ribs, because the audacity was unreal. I had worked tirelessly to carve out my space, my sanctuary in that small, cluttered room at the end of the hallway. That room wasn't just four walls and a bed, it was mine. It was where I had stayed up late, listening to music through the crack in my door, writing my thoughts in journals, and dreaming about leaving everything behind. And she, my golden haired, giggling, privileged sister, just waltzed in like she had every right to claim it. I clenched my fists under the table, my knuckles whitening, forcing myself to swallow the words that wanted to burst out. My heart thumped like a drum beat, loud enough that I was certain she could hear it. I could feel the muscles in my jaw tighten, my mind racing through possibilities, strategies, potential revenge. Not in some childish tantrum, but with a cold, meticulous precision that would make sure she remembered this night forever. Her voice broke the silence again, the smirk widening. "Don't look so upset. You'll get over it. It's just a room, after all." She leaned casually against the doorframe, one hand on her hip, the other brushing through her hair, every gesture dripping with the kind of confidence I hated. That arrogance that only she possessed. That audacity that my parents, for some reason, found endearing. "Just a room?" I finally muttered, my voice low, almost dangerously calm. I could feel her laugh at the tone of it, thinking it was just irritation, not the storm brewing beneath. "Yes, just a room. You'll barely notice I'm there." She grinned, a sharp, calculated grin, the kind that made you want to punch a wall. And that's when the first crack in my carefully constructed composure appeared. I had to fight the urge to stand up right there, in the middle of dinner, and scream at her, to make her understand that there are lines you don't cross. But I didn't. Not yet. Because patience, I realized, could be infinitely more terrifying than rage. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. Conversation floated above me like a cloud I couldn't penetrate. Words about school, work, the neighbor's cat, a new recipe Mom had tried, all meaningless drivel that I filtered through the haze of my anger. My sister leaned back in her chair, casually swinging her legs under the table, looking far too comfortable for someone who wasn't supposed to be there. I noticed the way my parents glanced at me occasionally, their faces softening, and I felt a deeper kind of heat rise inside me. Not just anger at her, but at them, their complicity, their indulgence. After dinner, I retreated to my room. At least I thought I had retreated. The hallway felt unnaturally long, the carpet muffling my footsteps, but not enough to silence the pulse in my ears. I closed the door behind me, locking it, even though I knew it wouldn't keep her out if she really wanted to push me. My room looked exactly the way I had left it, a mix of order and chaos, posters lining the walls, a desk cluttered with notebooks and half finished sketches, a stack of books teetering precariously by the bed. It was mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my hands through my hair, thinking about the audacity of her, thinking about the laughter, thinking about the fire in my chest that wouldn't die down. Then I heard it, a soft click at the door. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't move. Another click, louder this time, followed by a faint creak. And there she was, leaning against the doorframe again, as if she had every right to invade my sanctuary. Hey, she said casually, tilting her head. I thought I'd start unpacking. You don't mind, do you? Her words were sharp, slicing through the tension. And for the first time that night, I felt the icy edge of fear. Not for myself, but for the chaos that was about to unfold. I stood slowly, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight, trying to appear calm. I think you've made a mistake, I said, my voice steady but laced with a warning. I watched her eyes flicker, briefly, and I knew she felt it too. The first tremor in her confident armor. Really? Because Mom and Dad seemed pretty clear. Her smirk faltered just slightly. That tiny crack was all I needed. The room was silent for a moment, the kind of silence that stretches like a rubber band ready to snap. Then, as if on cue, I began, slowly, deliberately. I walked to my desk, picked up a small notebook, and opened it. But it wasn't a notebook at all, it was my plan, my blueprint. Every possible move, every little detail I had meticulously considered over the past weeks, months even, though she had no idea. The smirk returned to her face, slightly forced as she tilted her head, trying to read me, trying to guess what I was about to do. You really think this is going to stop me? She said, her voice lighter now, almost teasing again. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I pulled out a pen and began writing something down. Slowly, intentionally. Every stroke deliberate. Every line a declaration. And then I spoke, my voice calm but carrying an edge that made her pause. No, I think it's going to show you exactly what happens when you mess with me. Her laugh this time was nervous, shaky. Oh, come on, it's just a room. You're overreacting. I didn't respond. Instead, I set the notebook down and reached for my laptop. The screen lit up the room with a pale blue glow. I started typing, my fingers moving almost faster than I could think. Emails, messages, notifications, everything that could be controlled, tracked, manipulated. I knew her schedule, her habits, the small vulnerabilities she never noticed. And that's when I realized something terrifying yet exhilarating. I could own this, not just the room, but the night. She shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in the air. The playful teasing game she had started was turning into something far more calculated. And I was just getting started. By the time the first echo of midnight crept through the house, I had orchestrated a series of events that I knew would leave her reeling. Little surprises, small shocks, subtle manipulations, enough to make her feel the chaos she had casually thrust into my life. The apartment, the hallways, even the air seemed different, charged with anticipation. I watched her from my doorway, her confident posture slowly crumbling as she realized that the night was no longer hers to control. And then the first twist hit. A sound from the other room. A spill, a crash, a scream. I'm not even sure which. But she looked at me, wide-eyed for the first time. Fear. Real, raw fear. And the realization struck me in the chest. Power had shifted. She had underestimated me. That night, I didn't just reclaim my room. I reclaimed my presence, my voice, my authority. By sunrise, the house was quiet, the tension hanging like smoke, and I could finally sit back and breathe. The audacity of her had sparked a storm, but I had controlled it. I had shown her and my parents exactly who they were dealing with. And yet, as I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a new kind of unease. Because in proving my strength, I realized something terrifying. This was only the beginning. What started as a battle over a room had become a game neither of us fully understood, and the night was far from over. The morning sunlight poured through the blinds, slicing the room into golden stripes that danced across my floor. It should have felt peaceful, the way early mornings often do, but there was a tangible weight in the air. I could hear faint murmurs from the kitchen, the clinking of dishes, the low hum of conversation, but it all felt distant, like I was observing the world through a thick, translucent screen. My sister hadn't emerged yet, and that fact alone made me smile. I moved quietly, almost ghost like, toward the doorway, my bare feet barely making a sound on the carpet. The hallway stretched ahead, pale and silent, punctuated only by the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my weight. I paused at the threshold of the kitchen, peering inside. Mom and Dad were there, chatting as if nothing had happened, oblivious to the tension still lingering from last night. But I noticed her, my sister, standing by the fridge, half hidden, her arms crossed, tapping her foot with that familiar, impatient rhythm. She looked at me, a flicker of unease crossing her face before it was quickly replaced by her habitual smirk. I could tell she was trying to act normal, but the edges of her confidence were fraying. That tiny crack was all I needed to exploit. "Good morning," I said softly, letting the words hang in the air like a challenge. "Morning," she replied. The word clipped, a little sharper than intended. Her eyes darted away from mine, and for the first time, I noticed the slight tremor in her hand as she poured a glass of juice. Breakfast was a battlefield disguised as normalcy. Mom offered the usual platitudes about starting the day right, about chores, about homework schedules that seemed increasingly irrelevant. But I wasn't listening. I was watching, analyzing, planning. Every movement she made, every glance, every inflection became part of the game, and the game had rules only I could enforce. After breakfast, she retreated to my room, claiming she wanted to organize her things. I let her. Let her think she was in control. But from the moment the door closed behind her, I began setting subtle traps. Little annoyances that would make her think twice about her audacity. A sticky note on the closet door, a small rearrangement of her personal items, a faint smell I knew she disliked lingering just enough to make her uncomfortable. It was slow, deliberate, psychological warfare. But I didn't stop there. I had learned long ago that the most devastating form of power is anticipation, the sense that something is coming, though the target doesn't know exactly what. I left small, seemingly insignificant hints for her: a misplaced book, a chair turned slightly, a faint noise of footsteps that weren't mine. She noticed, of course, she always notices, but she couldn't quite place it, couldn't quite predict it. And that uncertainty gnawed at her confidence. Hours passed in this silent duel, the house vibrating with tension. My sister tried to act unbothered, speaking lightly, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. But I could hear it in her voice, that undercurrent of stress, the way her hand trembled ever so slightly as she adjusted a pillow or picked up a pen. I felt a strange satisfaction. Not cruelty, not malice, but the satisfaction of someone finally realizing that the world doesn't bend to them, that I wouldn't bend. By mid-afternoon, the stakes escalated. I had planned something bigger. I had discovered a minor flaw in her schedule, a window where she was entirely alone, and I seized it. I moved into her temporary room while she was out, rearranging furniture, hiding personal items, leaving subtle notes in strange places. "Not everything belongs to you, but," one read, written in my unmistakable scrawl. The thrill of anticipation coursed through me. I could almost hear her coming, could imagine the shock that would cross her face when she realized she was no longer in control. She returned sooner than expected, her footsteps fast, hesitant, and I held my breath, watching from the hall. The door opened, and she stepped inside. Her eyes immediately scanned the room, narrowing as she took in the subtle chaos. The notes, the furniture slightly shifted, the small items she had treasured hidden in plain sight. "What? What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound composed. "Just redecorating," I said, stepping into the room with a casual air, letting the words hang like a knife. "Thought it could use a fresh perspective." Her face paled, the smirk vanishing entirely. She tried to laugh, a nervous sound, but it faltered halfway. Her breathing quickened. I noticed it, the small, almost imperceptible rise and fall of her chest. the slight tightening of her fists, the way her eyes darted around, searching for some foothold of control. There was none. Not tonight. And then I introduced a subtle, almost cruel twist. I moved the family pet into the room. Not in a harmful way, of course, but in a manner that completely disrupted her space. The cat, always quiet and aloof, now prowled underfoot, brushing against her legs, jumping onto surfaces she had claimed as her own. She recoiled, her voice rising in pitch. Get it out! Now! I held the cat in my arms briefly, allowing her to watch, then released it gently near the doorway. It ran, but she had no way to corral it effectively. She was flustered, her carefully constructed image of dominance crumbling. I could see it in her eyes, the dawning realization that control was an illusion. By the time evening rolled in, the entire house was a stage, and she was the unwitting actor in a drama of my creation. Mom and Dad wandered in and out, oblivious to the psychological tension escalating in their midst. They commented on dinner plans, on errands, on trivial matters that seemed meaningless to me, but somehow highlighted the absurdity of their complacency. And then the first major twist struck. While she was in the kitchen arguing with Mom about a misplaced plate, I quietly slipped into her room again. There I left a small recording device I had hidden in the corner weeks ago, programmed to play faint whispers of sound, a voice resembling mine, just enough to make her pause, just enough to create a creeping unease. When she returned, she froze mid-step, staring at the corner where the device emitted its ghostly whispers. "What is that?" she stammered. Her voice shook, fear threading through the edges of her words. "Maybe. Just the room talking," I said, keeping my tone calm, almost indifferent. But I knew I had struck a nerve, and the look on her face, equal parts confusion and panic, was worth every ounce of restraint I had exercised that day. The night descended like a curtain, and with it the stakes reached their apex. I had prepared a final twist, a culmination of the subtle manipulations, the careful placement of objects, the psychological traps, and the whispered disorientations. It was almost theatrical, the way a director might guide a scene, each element timed to perfection. She entered the room one last time before bed, expecting to confront me with accusations or complaints. Instead, she found the room dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of my laptop screen. On it, a single message typed in a font that she could recognize as mine. "You asked for this. Welcome to my world." Her reaction was immediate. A sharp intake of breath, her hands trembling as she reached for the light switch, but I had anticipated this. I was already standing there, calmly blocking her attempt to illuminate the room fully, letting shadows play across her face, exaggerating the fear I had cultivated. What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Exactly what happens," I said, my tone steady, deliberate, almost hypnotic. "When you overstep, when you think the world is yours, when you underestimate me." She backed up, tripping slightly over the furniture I had subtly rearranged, her pulse visibly racing. And then in a move that shocked even me, she lunged forward, trying to grab the laptop, to regain some semblance of power. But I was faster, stepping aside, letting her stumble past me, her body crashing lightly against the bed. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The tension was a tangible thing, wrapping itself around our chests, making it hard to breathe, and then she laughed. Or rather, a hysterical, trembling sound that was more panic than amusement. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, and in that instant I realized something terrifying. This was no longer a simple battle for a room. This was a reckoning. Mom and Dad appeared at the doorway, startled by the commotion, but I simply raised a hand, signaling them to stay back. This was my stage now, and I was the orchestrator. By the time midnight approached, she had retreated to the corner of the room, exhausted, overwhelmed, and utterly aware that her reign of casual audacity had come to an end. I watched her, a strange mix of satisfaction and unease coursing through me. The victory was mine, but I could feel the undercurrent of something larger, something more unpredictable starting to stir. Because as much as I had planned, as much as I had controlled, the night had revealed one undeniable truth. We had opened a door neither of us could close, and somewhere, Deep beneath the layers of chaos and manipulation, a new tension had taken root, one that promised that the story was far from over. The house had settled into a tense silence after the chaos of the night, yet the atmosphere was electric, charged with unspoken anticipation. I could hear her breathing from across the room, shallow and uneven, a rhythm that made every corner of the house feel alive. I hadn't slept. I didn't need to. Sleep would have dulled the edge I had spent the day sharpening with painstaking precision. Instead, I prowled my territory like a predator, every step calculated, every glance strategic. By mid-morning, the first signs of rebellion began to surface. My sister emerged from her corner cautiously, her eyes darting, trying to gauge the lay of the land. She approached her supposed territory, her hands brushing over shelves and drawers as if trying to reassert ownership. But I had anticipated her every move. Each drawer had been subtly altered, items rearranged in ways that were disorienting but not immediately obvious. Pens were swapped with markers, notebooks replaced with blank sheets, a drawer of her clothes slightly refolded to create a sense of subtle disarray. She froze as she picked up a notebook and noticed a line of ink that wasn't hers, a message written in delicate, almost imperceptible handwriting. Not everything you touch is yours to claim. Her lips parted, her eyes wide, scanning the room for me, but I remained in the shadows, letting the message do the work. Her panic was quiet at first, then grew louder, more desperate, as she realized that even in the spaces she had thought were untouched, I had left my mark. The familiar rhythm of the house, the faint ticking of the hallway clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft flutter of curtains in the breeze, suddenly seemed alien, menacing. Every sound became amplified, a reminder that she had no control. I watched her from the doorway, my heart beating in sync with hers in a strange, exhilarating cadence. She moved like a trapped animal, her foot catching on a chair I had deliberately nudged slightly off balance, her fingers brushing over objects that were just slightly out of place. And I realized then how fragile her sense of dominance had always been, how easily it could be dismantled by attention to detail and a willingness to wait. By afternoon, I had escalated the tension even further. I set up small, almost imperceptible disturbances. A faint smell of citrus that she hated. A subtle shift in the lighting that made shadows dance unnaturally, a slight tapping sound near her window at irregular intervals. She tried to maintain composure, but the effort was visible. The furrow of her brow, the tapping of her fingers on the desk, the slight quiver in her jaw. Every small victory was mine, yet I knew that the crescendo was still to come. And then, a twist I hadn't entirely anticipated. She fought back. Small acts at first, repositioning her items, adjusting the furniture again, muttering under her breath about this being ridiculous, and why I had to ruin everything. But gradually her defiance grew bolder. She began to set traps of her own, subtle challenges that disrupted the carefully curated order I had established. A misplaced book on the edge of the desk, a hidden note suggesting I might not be paying attention, even a tiny silent shift in the cat's position that suggested she could manipulate the environment too. I recognized her growing cunning and smiled inwardly. This wasn't just a battle of space, it had become a war of wills. Every glance, every gesture, every subtle shift in tone was now part of an intricate dance. And the tension, thick and almost tangible, had begun to radiate through the walls, the furniture, the very air itself. Night fell again, and the house was quieter than before, the stillness oppressive. I had set my ultimate plan into motion, a psychological labyrinth designed to completely dismantle her sense of security. I had prepared a series of lights that flickered sporadically, each timed to create a sense of unease. The shadows played across the walls in unnatural patterns, twisting familiar shapes into forms that suggested movement where there was none. I left a series of small objects, everyday items rearranged in slightly impossible ways, forcing her to question what was real and what wasn't. She entered the room that evening, exhausted, wary, her face pale in the shifting glow of the lights. Her smirk was gone entirely, replaced by an edge of fear and confusion. What What is happening? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I stepped forward slowly, letting my shadow stretch across the room, the glow of the laptop screen behind me adding a cinematic depth to my silhouette. You asked for this, I said, my tone calm but heavy with an unspoken threat. You crossed a line. You assumed everything would be easy, that I would simply step aside. Her eyes darted around the room, catching every subtle shift I had orchestrated, and I realized with a thrill that she had finally understood. She was outmatched, but not by force, by attention, by patience, by precision. The very skills she had dismissed as trivial, the observation, the quiet focus, the ability to anticipate, were what had turned the night into my masterpiece. And then the real twist came. A sound from the hallway, soft, almost imperceptible, caused both of us to freeze. Footsteps. Not mine, not hers. Someone else was in the house. My pulse quickened as I realized that the stakes had shifted in an entirely new direction. Every trap I had set, every subtle manipulation, suddenly had a new layer of risk. She noticed my reaction before I could process it fully. Her face contorted with a mix of panic and newfound audacity. See? This is exactly what I mean. Someone's here, she exclaimed, her voice trembling but loud enough to echo through the house. I forced myself to stay calm, even as adrenaline coursed through my veins. I took a slow step toward the hallway, assessing, analyzing, heart hammering. The shadows moved strangely, distorted by the flickering lights. I realized then that I had underestimated one thing entirely: unpredictability. Even a meticulously planned night can be disrupted by something or someone you never expected. I stepped into the hallway, my sister behind me, clinging to the edge of the wall like a lifeline. The house was quiet again, too quiet, every creak amplified in the oppressive silence. And then I saw it, a figure at the far end, partially obscured by darkness. My breath caught. It wasn't an intruder, not exactly, but the presence was enough to make every plan, every carefully orchestrated trap seem fragile. Who's there? I demanded, my voice steady, despite the sudden surge of fear and excitement. The figure didn't respond, but then a small, metallic object glinted in the dim light. A key. My heart stopped for a fraction of a second as I realized what it meant. Someone had been in our house before the night even began. Someone had known. The implications hit me like a punch to the chest. Every move I had made, every psychological advantage I had cultivated, was now being threatened by forces I hadn't accounted for. The night wasn't just a battle between my sister and me anymore. It was a labyrinth, and someone else had left breadcrumbs through it, testing us, manipulating us, watching us play out a drama we didn't fully understand. Panic flickered in my sister's eyes, but I forced her to focus, to move with me as we approached the figure. Step by step, carefully, our combined movements cautious but deliberate. The house seemed to hold its breath, every shadow a potential threat. And then the final reveal. The figure stepped into the dim light, and I recognized them, not a stranger, but someone I thought I could trust. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thick with tension and disbelief. The revelation was jarring, the kind of shock that makes your stomach drop and your mind scramble for answers. This wasn't the night I had planned. The night I had meticulously orchestrated had been infiltrated, subverted, rewritten. And as the figure spoke, softly, almost mockingly, the truth emerged. My sister wasn't the only one with audacity. Someone else had been playing the long game all along. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying, yet exhilarating. The story wasn't mine alone. The night had become a stage for multiple players, each with their own agendas, each with the power to change the outcome. The moment stretched in the air, heavy and suffocating, as the figure stepped fully into the faint glow of the room. The light revealed someone I never expected, someone who should have been on my side, someone whose presence I had long trusted without question. And yet, there they stood, a smile that was half amusement, half challenge, twisting across their face in a way that made the blood in my veins chill. You really thought this night was just about a room, the figure said, voice calm, almost taunting. You really thought you could manipulate everything without anyone noticing? I froze, the words hitting harder than any insult my sister could have thrown. Every plan I had meticulously laid out, The subtle rearrangements, the whispers, the psychological traps had not been as secure as I thought. Someone else had anticipated me. Someone else had prepared, just as I had. My pulse raced, the familiar thrill of control slipping like sand through my fingers. My sister gasped behind me, her small frame trembling. I could feel her panic radiating, almost contagious. She had thought she was losing to me, but now the scale had shifted again. The power I had claimed, the victory I had felt was no longer mine alone. And the realization was intoxicating, terrifying in equal measure. I took a careful step forward, keeping my hands visible, my voice steady. "Who are you?" I demanded. "What are you doing here?" The figure tilted their head, letting the shadows play across their face. "Let's just say someone has been keeping an eye on this house for a long time, watching, waiting, learning." My mind raced, trying to process the implications. Watching? Learning? I realized then that nothing I had done tonight was private. Every subtle move, every whispered threat, every carefully calculated adjustment, they had seen it all. And now they were here, altering the rules in ways I hadn't considered. My sister stepped closer to me, seeking reassurance, protection, but I could feel the doubt in her steps. The fear was no longer just about the room. It was about the unknown presence that had entered our world, turning everything familiar into a labyrinth of uncertainty. I had to reclaim control, even if only for myself. I focused, assessing every possible reaction, every potential move. The house itself became a weapon, or perhaps a trap. Shadows, corners, and narrow hallways, all elements in the game I had once commanded, were now contested territory. The figure's eyes glinted with amusement. "You two really think this is a fight over a room? It's so much bigger than that. Much bigger than either of you realize." I took a deep breath, feeling the tension coil tighter in my chest. "Then tell me what it is," I said, voice low but unwavering. "Because right now, all I see is someone trying to turn my house into a stage for what exactly?" A pause, heavy and deliberate, as if words themselves were being weighed. And then the answer, delivered softly but with the kind of certainty that makes your stomach drop. "It's a test, a lesson, a demonstration of who really understands control, strategy, and observation. You've been playing a game, but someone else has been writing the rules all along." My mind spun. A test? Rules written by someone else? The audacity was staggering. Every plan I had made, every strategic advantage I had cultivated, now seemed like a single domino in a far larger structure I hadn't even realized existed. My sister whispered, voice barely audible, "Who, who would do this?" I didn't answer immediately. I didn't need to. The figure's next move explained everything, or at least part of it. They stepped closer, reaching into a pocket, and produced a small envelope worn at the edges. The weight of it seemed disproportionately heavy, as though it carried more than paper, more than information. "Open it," the figure said. "Everything you need to know is inside." I hesitated, the air thick with tension, knowing that whatever lay inside could shatter the precarious balance of power we had fought over all night. But I reached for it. Careful, deliberate, hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I tore it open slowly, letting the sound of the paper breaking echo in the room like a gunshot. Inside was a single sheet typed neatly. "Control is never absolute. Observation is never complete. The audacity of one often blinds them to the audacity of another. Tonight is not just a fight for a room, it is a test of perception, patience, and power. Will you rise, or will you fall?" My breath caught. The words weren't just a warning, they were a mirror, reflecting everything I had done and everything I had missed. The thrill of my earlier victories now mixed with a creeping fear. Someone had orchestrated this entire scenario, and we had both been unwitting participants in a larger game. I looked up at the figure. "And what happens if we fail?" I asked, voice tight but controlled. They smiled, a flash of something inscrutable. "Failure is not an option, but the consequences, well, that depends on how you handle the night ahead." I turned to my sister, who was staring at me, wide-eyed. trying to process what was happening. The roles had shifted, the stakes had escalated, and suddenly everything I had thought I understood about control, audacity, and power felt like a fragile illusion. We spent the next hour moving through the house, following a series of subtle clues left by the figure. Each step revealed another layer of the test, another challenge designed to push our perception, our patience, our ability to anticipate. Objects shifted slightly, messages appeared in unexpected places, and shadows seemed to move where no source of light could justify it. My sister and I fell into an uneasy rhythm, a tense collaboration forged by necessity rather than choice. We began to anticipate each other's thoughts, our previous rivalry temporarily set aside as we navigated the labyrinthine challenges. Every corner we turned revealed new complexities, a mirror reflecting a distorted image of ourselves, a faint sound that suggested movement behind us, a note scrawled in handwriting I didn't recognize but instinctively understood. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. Every moment was a trial, a test of endurance, awareness, and strategy. And through it all, the figure observed, a silent presence guiding us, pushing us, ensuring that every step, every reaction contributed to the lesson. Finally, we reached the living room, where the figure had left one final challenge. In the center of the room was a small box, unassuming, but heavy with implication. The figure gestured toward it. This is the culmination. Open it, and see what the night has been preparing you for. I approached cautiously, my sister beside me, our hands trembling despite our focus. I lifted the lid slowly, and inside was a collection of photographs, each one capturing moments of our lives we hadn't realized were being observed. Tiny, intimate snapshots of our habits, our quirks, our reactions to stress and challenge. My stomach tightened. Every moment of arrogance, every flicker of emotion, every misstep, captured. And then a final photo at the bottom of the stack. One I could barely comprehend. A picture of the two of us, standing together in the very room we had fought over. Our expressions a mixture of fear, determination, and realization. Beneath it, a single typed line. The audacity to claim control is meaningless without the wisdom to respect it, and the humility to understand that power is always shared. I looked at my sister, her eyes reflecting the same shock, the same dawning comprehension. And I realized something profound. The night had never been about the room. It had been about us, our perception, our strategy, our ability to navigate complexity, conflict, and uncertainty. The figure stepped forward, the shadows finally receding to reveal their full presence. Tonight, you both learned more than you realized, they said softly. Control is an illusion. Audacity is dangerous. And observation is the greatest power of all. I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The tension that had gripped the house all night began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet understanding. My sister and I, once rivals locked in a battle over space and dominance, now shared a newfound respect, not only for each other, but for the subtle, invisible forces that shape every interaction, every moment of conflict. And as the figure turned and walked toward the door, leaving us with the echoes of their lesson, I understood something else, something terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. The night wasn't over. The challenges, the lessons, the games, these were far from concluded. But we had survived. We had endured. And in doing so, we had glimpsed a truth that would forever alter how we viewed control, power, and audacity. The house was quiet again, the shadows long and stretched across the floor, but I could feel the pulse of possibility lingering in every corner. My sister and I stood together, exhausted but aware, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we truly understood each other. Not fully, perhaps, but enough to recognize that the battle we had fought was only one part of a much larger story, one that had just begun. The house had settled into an uneasy calm, but the tension from the night lingered like smoke in every corner. I walked slowly through the rooms, the floor creaking softly under my weight. Shadows stretched across walls, elongating familiar objects into strange, almost threatening forms. Even though the figure had left, their presence felt embedded in the house, in the way the light fell on the carpet, in the subtle movements of air that seemed almost alive. My sister followed behind me, quieter now, her earlier audacity replaced by a careful attentiveness. We didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. The night had rewritten our understanding of each other, of control and of audacity. I returned to my room, the sanctuary that had sparked the initial conflict. The air felt different, charged, almost reverent, as though the space had absorbed every ounce of tension, every strategic maneuver, every whispered threat, and held it in memory. My desk, my notebooks, the cluttered bookshelves, they all felt like artifacts of a battle that had tested more than just our patience or cunning. They were evidence of a lesson learned, a war fought silently in the shadows of normalcy. She lingered by the door, and for a moment, I almost expected her to return to her old behavior, to mock or challenge. But she didn't. Her eyes, wide and tired, met mine, and I saw something I hadn't expected: respect. Not the hollow politeness of family, not the casual acknowledgement of victory, but a recognition of the magnitude of what had occurred. I nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, and she nodded back. Then came the final revelation, the one that neither of us could have predicted. Among the scattered notes and photographs left behind by the figure was a small envelope addressed to me alone. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, heart hammering. Inside was a single, handwritten note. The audacity to claim what is yours is a lesson in courage. The wisdom to share what you protect is a lesson in maturity. The night was not about you nor about her. It was about understanding the limits of control, the value of observation, and the consequences of underestimating the unseen forces that shape our lives. Remember this: every action, no matter how small, ripples beyond your comprehension. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The lesson wasn't over. It wasn't about vengeance or triumph. It was about perception, humility, and the hidden currents that influence behavior in ways we rarely understand. The audacity of my sister, the manipulations I had orchestrated, even the mysterious figure who had tested us. Everything was a mirror reflecting not just conflict, but the choices we make in response to audacity and challenge. We sat together in silence for what felt like hours, absorbing the weight of the night, processing the series of twists that had dismantled and rebuilt our understanding of control. The house, too, seemed to breathe with us, quiet yet alive with the lingering echoes of strategy, anticipation, and revelation. I realized then that the true victory wasn't in claiming a room, nor in outmaneuvering my sister. It was in the awareness we had gained, the insight into ourselves, and the understanding of how audacity, whether ours or someone else's, could ignite forces beyond immediate perception. As dawn crept through the blinds, painting the walls in pale gold, I understood something essential. Life is never a matter of total control. Audacity is a double-edged sword, humility a rare but potent shield, and observation the most powerful weapon of all. I glanced at my sister, who finally allowed herself a small, tentative smile. It wasn't reconciliation in the traditional sense. It was an acknowledgement, a truce born from the shared intensity of the night. We didn't speak of the figure or of the lessons directly. There was no need. The echoes of the night, the shadows in the corners, the subtle rearrangements of the room, and the lingering sense of unseen forces were enough to keep the understanding alive. And as we prepared for the day, carrying the weight of experience in silence, I felt a strange clarity. The audacity we wield or encounter shapes the contours of our lives far more than we realize. For the audience, I leave this: when someone crosses a boundary you hold sacred, how do you respond? Do you retaliate immediately, or do you observe, plan, and wait? How often do we underestimate the unseen forces at play in our lives? Forces that guide outcomes beyond our perception? And finally, when we are tested, do we rise with audacity, humility, or fear? Consider not just who holds control, but how awareness, patience, and understanding define true power. The house was quiet yet alive. The lesson of the night remained, lingering in every shadow, every creaking floorboard, and in the spaces between our words. And I knew without doubt that audacity, both given and received, would echo far beyond the confines of a single room.